Hello, how are we? So this is going to be completely different to what you've been listening to today. I hope you like it. I do give talks outside the industry, surprisingly. It does exist, a world outside. And a lot of the time I'm asked to talk about some of the skills I use in the job. And I thought I'd have a look today. So what I needed to do first of all is an experiment. So I'm going to talk a bit about deception and deception detection. And I'm going to give you some stats later about how the general public and a couple of different professions are with detecting lies. But I wanted to see how a security audience would do. So I've got 3 people who are going to help me out. And I'm just going to need to do something for a minute. So in my hand, I've got 3 pieces of paper, identical. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 3 of my volunteers just to pick a piece of paper. Tom?
Can I look at it?
Not yet. Sarah. Okay. So what I want you to do, for the 3 people who've got a piece of paper, on 2 of the pieces of paper are blank, and one of them's got the word lie on it. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to tell me, to come up and just give the audience 2 sentences, okay? If you've got nothing on the piece of paper, just tell the truth. And if you've got the word lie, I just want you to make something up. All I want you to do is very briefly tell the audience about a memorable meal. Okay? So nothing that anyone was with you at. Just very briefly, you know, what it was, why it was memorable. Could have been good, could have been bad, anything like that, okay? And what I want you guys to do is see if you can spot the liar. All right? So, do that in a minute. So obviously, as a social engineer, a lot of the time I'm actually introduced as a professional liar, which is a bit of an insult. And I suppose it's kind of true. You know, if you define deception as the act of hiding the truth, illegal methods used to get something, or to make people believe that something is true and it isn't, social engineers are professional liars. And obviously we use that in various ways throughout the job. So whether it's physical infiltration, whether it's writing spear phishing emails, any kind of contact involves deception. But also there's another part of the job where learning how to spot deception is quite useful on the investigative side, on the defence side. So I learned, I did some extensive studying on credibility and deception a few years ago. And I've used it in the job for various things. Now, we've had mention today insider threat a few times, and so deception work is involved with that. We look at emails, also investigations for clients, so fraud clients, criminal clients, and also a lot of high net worth individuals who are looking at their teams and looking to see if we can spot, if you like, the insider threat. It's also applied in what we call, we now have to call intensive interview. We used to call it interrogation. We're not allowed to call it interrogation anymore. And really, we're not supposed to call it intensive. We're supposed to call it investigative. But the reason this matters is because the insider threat is on the increase, or at least the reporting of it is. And when you think you've identified insider threat, and you want to go through what they've written, and perhaps do face-to-face interviews, some of the stuff I'm going to tell you today might help you spot some deception. Now, before I go any further on that, I just want to let you know, this is a massive area. It takes years to get even close to perfecting it. And obviously in half an hour I can only give you a few pointers. But I still think in this community it might be useful. And that's why I've put it out there. So if I could have my 3 memorable meals. Don't be insulted by the potatoes. I did say to, if we could have Tom and Dave and Sarah come up and just tell us about your meal now, please. Don't be insulted by the potatoes. I said a memorable meal and they said, Ireland, you've got to put spuds up. And I thought you wouldn't like that, but then they said. So yeah, if you could just... So what I want you to do is just observe, make your mind up, but don't say anything to anyone, raise your hands or anything, and we'll do it again at the end. Tom, let me watch you though.
My memorable meal was in New York City, Peter Luger's. It was with 2 friends who unfortunately are no longer with us. And I'd heard about this restaurant because I watched a TV show about it where they hung the meat downstairs. And when I asked if I could go and see the place downstairs, the waiter kind of threateningly said to me, "We can't let you down there because you might slip and hurt yourself," which felt more like a threat than a warning.
Thanks, Tom. Dave?
My most memorable meal was when I was also in New York City at Leith Hall as a steakhouse there, and it was a fantastic meal, and Colin Farrell, of all people, was at the next table, and it was pretty interesting.
It was a mirror.
My memorable meal was at the Witchery in Edinburgh with my mum, who's no longer with us, and it was amazing. We were watching the fireworks on New Year's Eve out of the window, so that was mine.
Thank you. You can sit down. So what I'm going to do, if you want to think, sorry, Coops. So have a think in your head. Don't say to anyone else. See if you can pick out which one you think was the one that was telling the lie. And then what we'll do is we'll ask you to play it one more time before the end after I've given you some tips. And then we'll have a show of hands of who we think. But just to put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to write down on here who I think it is. And we'll see if I was right as well. Okay? Okay, so finding out whether someone's telling the truth or telling a lie has been the holy grail for humanity forever, okay? We've got lots of different lie detection methods. Back in ancient China, you used to heat up a spoon and put it in someone's mouth, and if it stuck to your tongue, you were lying, because they were working on the theory that your mouth goes dry when you lie, which it sometimes does, and I'll show you why in a minute. We've got the Bocca della Verita in Rome, which was someone who was accused of a lie, was told to put the hand in the mouth. And now, if they were telling the truth, the hand came out intact. If they were lying, they'd lose some fingers. It probably doesn't take a genius to work out that there was someone standing behind the Bocca della Verita with a big sword. You see, lie detection is a political thing a lot of the time. A lot of the data collection methods are political. The data sets tend to be biased. So, for example, a lot of the technology only focuses on white males, even though it's used to help convict people of colour and other things. You might be familiar with ducking stools. Hopefully you're not. And then, you know, the tech goes on. We've got things like truth serums. You know, Mick mentioned polygraphs. And polygraphs do not measure credibility or deception. What they measure is psychophysiological responses. So everything from pupil dilation to endocrine activity, to how much you sweat, blood pressure, that type of thing. They work well because people think that they work. But actually what they're measuring is stress responses. It's the questioning technique that convicts or gets people to look guilty and admit guilt. And then we've got things like, because I thought I'd put tech in for you, you see. There's even one slide just for a technical crowd, which is high-definition thermal camera images. Basically, the face, everyone, what's so lovely is everyone is exactly the same under their skin, right? Human face has 44 muscles, and they move in certain ways when we experience one of the 7 major emotions, regardless of your age, gender, ethnicity, anything else. These are the 7. You might know them as microfacial expressions. People keep trying to discredit microfacial expressions, but the research just over and over again shows that we all do the same thing. I have no more time to talk to you about that today, unfortunately. We've also got brain scan technology, because apparently part of the brain, when it remembers, lights up, as opposed to part of the brain that's never seen something before lights up. So it's got implications if people are accused of, say, for example, a murder, and you show them a picture of the scene. If they've seen it before, one side of the brain lights up. If they've never seen it, the other side does. So in theory, it's going to help with innocent people accused of crimes. And then finally, we've got AI, particularly looking to go into airports. And the problem with all the technology is there does tend to be a lot of false positives. And of course, some guilty people get through as well. So we're still not there with the technology. Now, we are crap as a species at detecting deception. Okay, and this is why I'm so interested in this little experiment that I'm doing. The general public are no better than chance, and neither is law enforcement, depending on what study you look at, anything between 49 and 53%. Intelligence community are only slightly better, but it shouldn't surprise you to see that maximum security prisoners are the best people in the world at reading emotion and detecting whether basically someone is bluffing, and that's because it's obviously a matter of life and death, whether they know that. Deception detectors, as in people who've done all their training, claim 70%, right? Anecdotally, it's hard to prove sometimes because sometimes we never know the outcome. And so what we never do is say whether someone's telling a lie or telling the truth. We give a balance of credibility. So the probability of credibility is X. So, why are we so bad? Firstly, because you do not want to believe that people are liars. Now, this is the security community, right? We are paranoid and we don't mind this, but your general public want to believe that people, they want to come from a good place. They want to believe that people are honest more than people are deceptive. There's also some people who are incredibly good at it. So if you go to the sociopathic, psychopathic tendencies, the lies are rehearsed very well. So whether we can spot someone lying depends on the person who's doing the lie itself and the consequences, the enormity of it, and the lie spotter, right? So some people are better at detecting it for other reasons. But we also like to think that good-looking people, people who look the part and sound the part, are good. We make our mind up as a species very quickly on whether someone's credible or not. And that can cause us problems because we all know that what people think we are and what we actually are sometimes not the same. We've also got things like cog biases kicking in. If you've decided something is right, and particularly if you've declared it in public, it's very hard psychologically to go back on that. There's also an awful lot of, frankly, rubbish and pseudoscience about lie detection, particularly the eye movement thing, which is from the discredited pseudoscience, my opinion only, of NLP. The eye movement is not credible, has been disproved by Professor Wiseman and others over the years. So, we're rubbish at it, and we shouldn't be, because when we lie, we give off lots of signals. What do we have to do to tell a lie? The first thing you have to do is conceal the truth, right? So you have to remember the thing that you're trying not to talk about. Make sure that you conceal it. The other thing you have to do is fabricate a new truth, preferably one that is credible, and you need to forget the old one and work with the new one. You also have to try and look innocent and not arouse suspicion. This genius broke into a house, stole a phone, took a photograph of himself with the phone in the house, and then sent it to the lady's workmates, incarcerated. You also have to cover your deceptive actions with something else and try and give a story that covers up what happened. And also, you have to remember the details of a new story, and preferably not one that anyone else can deny. And so what happens is your brain's doing a lot of heavy lifting. It kind of overloads. We call it cognitive overload. And I was desperately searching for a technical analogy. But what it's like is this. Sorry, can I have a round of applause for my first ever technical slide? Thank you. The way I used to describe it to non-technical people who perhaps wouldn't judge me so bad if I get this wrong is it's just like having every program open on your computer. It's like everything's going on, your brain's doing the heavy lifting, and what happens is that you start to leak information. Now, we don't have time today for me to give you too many details, but I work across a 7-trap system. So basically, when I'm interviewing someone who is a person of interest in an inquiry, we look at different things. We look at these 7 things, and today I'm just going to focus on a couple of them for you, okay? Remember, I do not want to split up any marriages, cause any problems in work. Just me telling you this does not mean you can conclude. They're just some tips, okay? 30 minutes. The first thing you need to understand is there are myths about body language, okay? We wouldn't even refer to it as body language in the trade. We refer to it as non-verbals. And there's so much of it that I really can't even begin to address it today. But basically, gestures can't be judged because they're nuanced. In the same way that we have language within our community, there is body language within communities, even within families. So you can't really judge that. So what I'm going to show you is what human beings do under certain conditions so that you can see what stress looks like. But from a body language point of view, the first thing that we would look at is just these three things. You're basically assessing, when you're looking at a subject, is this person, are they confident or do they lack confidence? Right? Just generally, without any other training. Remember that we've only used words for about 90,000 years as a species, but we've been communicating for millions of years, as long as you don't believe in that we just landed here 2,000 years ago or whatever. And so we've always communicated without words, right? So you've got a lot going for you up front. So are they confident or not? Are they comfortable or not? And particularly in the not so much cybersecurity world, but in security, are they calm or agitated? Okay. Now, all that is data. We don't conclude. It's just, is it this or is it this? Is it this or is it this? Once we know that, and once we establish someone's kind of base state, and I'm going to talk more about that later, the next thing to know is what stress looks like in a human being. To tell a lie, to be dishonest or deceptive, is a stress factor in human beings. And because it's a stress factor, it kicks off certain things in our physiology, and particularly in the brain. So what we're dealing with here, and I'm very careful to say this with you sitting right next to me, is the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. Right? Is it just me not getting now? So what that does, the autonomic nervous system, it controls the automatic functions of the body, okay? And what it does is it sends signals out to the heart, the lungs, your internal organs, and your glands particularly. And the reason glands are important is because they start to make the chemicals that assist in fight or flight, which I'll show you in a minute. But the autonomic nervous system is associated with threat. Okay, and so what it does is it's constantly scouring the environment, looking for threats to your well-being or for anything significant to your well-being, and it's doing it automatically without you realising it. If it was more conscious, it would be slower and it wouldn't save you. So you can imagine if you're driving along and a car pulls out in front of you, a whole heap of things happen. You know, you might go for the brake, you might turn the wheel, but before you've even time to do that, your pupils have dilated to take in the threat and then constricted to focus upon it. And a lot of other things are happening. You've got a chemical cocktail going through your system, everything getting ready to protect you. But it's not subconscious. We call it opaque to consciousness. So it's kind of happening even beyond subconscious, okay? And it's there to protect you. We use it in social engineering because what we know is if we can get someone into an emotional state, we can override the part of the brain, the neocortex, which is actually your thinking brain, okay? So what happens is the thalamus here, sorry, biology lesson now. The thalamus here processes visual and audio signals coming in from that automatic system, and it passes it through to the rest of the brain. It goes pretty much straight to the amygdala, which controls emotion. The amygdala works very, very quickly and overrides everything else. And so we act in that emotional fog. And that's where social engineering comes in, because if you can raise that in a person, their decision-making capacity just plummets, okay? Finally, when the threat goes and when the state starts to kind of climb down from that emotional state, that information's passed to the neocortex, which is the human, the rational part of the brain, and we have more time to think about it, which is why all the fraud programs and everything help people to take two and to step back and just come away from the immediate situation. And the thing is, when we lie, it's a state of fear as much as anything else, okay? So stress and fear are very similar in this particular area. And fear is a prescription, right? So we're all scared of some universal things just as humans, but every human's scared of different things. So I'm scared of spiders. There'll be people on here with probably pet spiders, given the crowd. So it's on a spectrum of stress, okay? So let's imagine that you're an insider threat or some other bad actor, and someone's investigating you and talking to you. What happens to you from that autonomic nervous system that you can't do anything about? And we go into the freeze, fight, and flight mechanism. So in Freeze mode. Now, not everyone does this in the exact same order, by the way, and the strength of it's different for different people because people are individual and can control things differently. But typically what we see first is that people go into sort of rabbit in the headlights syndrome, right? So they become slower in what they do. They have little flash freezes when we interview them, and I film a lot of it and then analyse it later. The nervous system starts to raise the blood pressure, the breaths become a bit shallow. But the main thing that we see in interview is that your fine motor skills get knocked out by this state. So what happens is people will, if they're sipping water or whatever, they'll put the cup down. If they're drawing or doing anything else, they stop everything and become a lot more still. If that doesn't work, in other words, because keeping still is your best defence against a predator. Right? Who's seen Jurassic Park? Most of the movement, right? But the thing is, in this situation, an investigative interview, they can't get away. So they go into flight mode. And what happens in flight mode? The blood gets directed to the legs by the autonomic nervous system because your biggest muscles are in your legs. So that's your best chance of escape. So now you've got blood coming through your legs. You've got chemicals coursing through your system and everything's telling you to get away, but you can't get away, right? The threat is still there. So what happens is we have nervous energy and people start to fidget, and that's where certainly law enforcement over the years have told me the fidgeting and stuff is a sure sign for them that something's wrong, okay? And what it is you're trying to get rid of that energy, but you can't run. But the urge to run is there and it becomes irresistible. Finally, if that doesn't work, we go to fight mode. Our proximity to other people becomes closer. If you want to know how effective that is, just put your hand, don't touch the person next to you, but just put the finger as close to their face as you possibly can without touching them. Like, see, so many people didn't even do it. You don't like it because you become a space invader, right? But in fight mode, you get closer to people. The eyes focus on the object of the attack. Your brain sharpens and starts to recall things. And natural anaesthetics kick in. So if you're injured, you've still got the ability to run away. That's why you feel pain sometimes after the fact. But what tends to happen in that situation is that we don't physically fight anymore, we argue, because we've evolved. So what happens is you've got a subject who you think is guilty, you've got them under pressure, and you're seeing these stress signs, and now you've got a choice. And the choice is, do we keep them under pressure or do we let them off? And that's up to the investigator. So I just want to finish with a few things just before my time's up. I just want to show you a few things about linguistic flags and indicators, right? And as I say, please just take this as a starter for 10. Do not go home and judge people. But the first thing that we would do is we would ask the subject to talk about whatever the event or events are that we're asking them about to see if they're guilty. And what we're looking at for here is narrative balance. So stories should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Typically, and remember I'm only saying typically because it's so nuanced, but typically an innocent person will tell the story but focus a lot on the heart of the matter. What most people who ask questions and interviews don't do is focus on the real topic in hand, right? So criminals and liars can talk for any amount of time about their journey in and what they have for lunch and everything else. It's when you get onto the actual subject that they're accused of or the difficulty that they have trouble. So we get them to focus on that. So it's a story, but make sure they focus on the middle bit. Typically, if we're telling a lie, we focus more on what's not the topic. Other indicators: refusal to answer the question, right? So if you're asked a question, like most innocent people, if I said to you, did you kill someone on Tuesday? You go, no, unless you did. And again, who knows, this crowd. Did you kill someone Tuesday? No. But unfortunately, or typically, liars wouldn't do that. They'd start talking about other things. They change the subject. Can we have a comfort break? Or they answer another question. Well, let me tell you about Tuesday. The other thing that they do, innocent people don't do this, but often guilty people do this, is they start making what we call halo statements, oaths. So they say things like, on my honour, as God is my witness. Why are you asking me? You know, I've always been a great employee. Right? Whereas innocent people tend to go, no, I didn't do it. How could you possibly accuse me of that? It's not company policy, that type of thing. The reason is that truthful witnesses are more confident the facts will prove what they're saying, so they don't need to say, I'm a good person, right? There's also flat refusal to deny. If you remember this scene from Game of Thrones, where she said she reads out Littlefinger's crimes, and after every one she says, do you deny it? And he never denies it. And it unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but typically that's the case. They just fail you to deny. The other thing is not answering the question, but answering a general question, right? So did your mother kill all those people? Well, she wouldn't hurt a fly. Yeah, but we're not talking about a fly. We're talking about people she's accused of murdering. Do you see? And really the last one is distance in language. You know, typically when someone's lying, what they'll do is they won't use her or the name. So instead of doing that, he uses that woman, and then he says a name after a pause. We call it response latency. So typically, this will be an indicator. When this came on, everyone in the community, the lie detection community, the phone, you know, everyone was kind of pinging each other and everything else because it was a very clear indicator. Truthful people, this story is logical. By which I mean, often when someone's telling you a lie, the facts don't add up. So we had an incident once where someone said, well, you know, they were saying that they were in Portsmouth, say, at 9 o'clock in the morning, but that they managed to get to Aberdeen, for example, by lunchtime. The facts just didn't add up. It's not logical. It's not consistent. We also have issues of, you might think about details, right? When people are telling the truth, what happens is your memories are rubbish, right? I can manipulate your memory, like we do it all the time in work. We can manipulate memory, we can put pictures and images and numbers in people's heads all the time. But when you're remembering something, because the truth's on your side, things pop into your head all the time. So you come up with like silly details that aren't really relevant to the story. The story pops all around. So, you know, we're here at one point and then you can go backwards and forwards. You can move along a truthful story really easily because you're remembering. But a liar typically will rehearse a story from start to finish. So if you ask them to go in and out of that narrative, it's quite a difficult thing to do. And what they probably haven't thought of doing is putting some irrelevant detail in. You know? So when I say relevant details, it might be like, I was interviewing one lady and she said, oh yes, and you know, it was a big fraud in work and there was a lot of money at stake. And she'd been socially engineered, which is why I was looking at it. And she said, oh, I remember that day. I remember because I cut my hand. And actually there was blood all over the post-it notes. It was horrible actually. People wondered, well, that's nothing to do with this, is it? Well, no, it's not. Right? But you wouldn't remember it or put that in. Unless you would remember, you know, it's like it's unlikely a liar would put those kind of details in. So memory remembers irrelevancy as much as it does relevance. Okay. And then we use emotions. I have no time today to talk to you any more about emotions, but, you know, the study of it and the manipulation is at the heart of social engineering, but the way it affects people is at the heart of lie detection as well. So I just want to, before we go and do our, see how we did on our lie detection, I'm just going to give you this 6C model. And it's really important that I tell you this because some of the stuff I just told you is fairly powerful, and I don't want you to just go in and use it. So this is the way it works. The first thing you do when you're looking at a subject is you look at the baseline for the subject, okay? So what's that person like when they've no reason to lie to you and they're not under pressure? Once you have that baseline established, you're looking for a change in state. So a verbose person stops talking, a relaxed person becomes more agitated, that type of thing. When you see that, the context is everything. So 9 times out of 10, you know, if people are rubbing their eyes or squinting or touching the face, that can be a deceptive sign. But often it's just because they're tired or they're looking into the sun. We look for clusters, not single signals, and we look for congruence. So is what they say matching up with the way they're behaving and all these indicators? If you think you see something, it is not an opportunity to draw conclusions, to project, to suggest. It's just data collection. And at that point, it's your cue to use questioning techniques in order to get that person more under pressure and to see whether or not they're telling the truth or a lie. But I've no time to tell you about questioning techniques. You just have to ask me back to Dublin next year if you want to know about that.
Oh, no.
So, what can I say? So if you can have our 3 volunteers up again. And can you just tell the same story again? And then if no one can do anything for a minute, and don't tell us if you got the lie tab, any of you. And then I'm just going to ask for a show of hands and we'll see how we did. Do we just want to say the same story again?
My favourite meal was in a restaurant called Peter Luger's in New York City with two friends who are unfortunately no longer with us. And I particularly remember it because I'd seen the restaurant on a TV show and I'd heard that they hung the meat themselves downstairs. When I asked to view it, the waiter said to me, I can't let you do that because you might slip and have an accident, which sounded more like a threat than a warning.
My memorable meal was with my mum at the Witchery restaurant in Edinburgh, and it was really memorable because it was New Year's Eve. We were watching the fireworks out of the window.
Dave?
And my memorable my memorable meal was at Les Hall in New York City, and it just happened to be that Colin Farrell was sitting at the next seat, and I'll leave it at that because pretty much exactly what I said before.
Thank you. If you could go back to your chairs, but if you go back to your chairs, but not sit down.
Oh, all right.
Okay. All right. So if you just stand by chairs, and I want you to remain standing. So from a show of hands, can I have a show of hands who thinks that Tom? Wave Tom for me. Hands up if you think Tom was the one telling the lie. Okay. Hands down. Now have a show of hands if you thought that it was Dave telling the lie. Hands down. And if you thought it was Sarah. Okay, hands down. If I could ask the two people telling the truth to sit down and the person telling the lie to remain standing, and thanks for listening.